Okay, welcome back to another episode of Health Without the System. I'm Dr. Tim Scott.
My name's Mia Scott. Welcome back, everyone. For our first-time listeners, welcome for the first time.
So one of the things I like about this podcast is this is just kind of us in real life. So a little reality for everyone. I just worked a couple night shifts in a row. My brain doesn't feel like it's functioning really well. We had our son's birthday party today, so we're tired.
Yeah, running on fumes.
Yeah,
I'm doing okay.
Sorry if we aren't the clearest, but
That was
we
me.
we do have a great episode, and I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, this is, I always say this is my favorite episode, but really near and dear to me is muscle preservation and how important muscle is for our body. And this is something that I got probably passionate about, I don't know, like 7 or so years ago when I started to strength train. Now, don't get me wrong, I've worked out probably most of my entire life. However, it wasn't clear to me how important muscle preservation and what that means for somebody's body and health until I got a little bit older. And then now it's like what we do all the time with our metabolic patients. So today we're going to dive into, do people who lift heavy live longer, and what can muscle mass do to your body or lack thereof, and the consequence of not having muscle mass as we age.
Yeah, and we did talk about this for anyone who's been with us a while or listened to our old stuff. Episode 8, we talked about muscle mass, and I think that one dove into a lot more physiology. I think we're keeping it a little bit more broad this time. We do have a little bit of physiology intertwined, but a little bit more about what building the muscle mass does, what not having it can hurt. And I think it will just kind of flow a little bit, especially for our non-medical listeners.
Yep.
Very important to roll back around and talk about it again.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's dive in. If I could prescribe one medication that could reduce dementia or dementia risk and insulin resistance and osteoporosis, dementia, and even early death, this could be life-changing. It would actually be strength training. And it sounds a little bit dramatic when you say it like that, but as we dive into the data, you'll see that it actually isn't dramatic at all. And when we zoom out and take a look of what's actually happening, we can predict how well someone's going to age, not just how long they live, but how well they can function and how muscle keeps showing up as the same common denominator, which means it's so very important.
Yeah, you said a key phrase there, not just how long they live, but how well they function. And I think we use these terms, and if you want to talk about it more and what's popular, lifespan and healthspan. And we've said it many times. Lifespan is the years you spend alive. Healthspan is the years you're healthy, being able to do the things you love. There is a big difference. It's about an 11-year difference in the United States right now. The average person lives to 77. The health span, the years you're healthy doing what you love, is age 66. This episode today is one of the more important ones on how to close that gap, how to not only live longer, but function longer.
Mm-hmm. And I preach that to my patients very often. I'm not just trying to help you right now. I want you to essentially train for your future, your grandkids, running around, still going on vacations and walks with your spouse, and things that we take for granted. And as we age, we can lose a lot of these things that we loved to do. And what's quality of life if you can't have the life that you loved to live? So the key to that is muscle. So let's unpack why.
Let's jump in. Muscle, the metabolic control, right? So muscle, we have said, is your largest glucose storage organ. After you eat, about 70 to 80% of that glucose is supposed to be absorbed into skeletal muscle. Not fat, not liver, but muscle. The American Diabetes Association has published extensively on this. Skeletal muscle is the primary site of insulin-mediated glucose uptake. It's also, incidentally, the primary site of non-insulin-mediated glucose uptake, which we'll talk a little bit about today. So when muscle mass is low, what happens? Well, glucose stays in the bloodstream longer. Insulin stays elevated longer. That means fat storage is going to increase. And of course, we've talked about fat. It's its own organ. It releases its own cytokines. When fat storage increases, inflammation rises. Over time, this pattern, this right here, is insulin resistance. It's driving insulin resistance.
Yeah, and I don't know, was it just a few episodes ago that we were talking about the insulin, again, being so inflammatory? But these are all things that brew that storm where your body can stay in an inflamed state. So, think of it as over time, this pattern will continue to drive insulin resistance, like Tim said. And we always say, think of muscle like a sponge. The bigger the sponge, the more glucose it has to absorb. And the smaller the sponge, the more sugar that floats around, damaging blood vessels, nerves, kidneys, and brain tissue.
I always think of like glucose in the bloodstream as sort of like that little like irritating guy trying to start a fight with everybody. It's just kind of like punching your vessel wall, kicking your kidney capillaries, things things
and
like
insulin
that.
wants to get it into the cell, but too much insulin is very inflammatory, as we know too. And I've said this example 1,000 times in our podcast, but wearing a continuous glucose monitor, you can very clearly see that when you are exercising, you will have a drop in blood sugar. You might have an acute response at first as your body is trying to give you some of that glucose, but then your muscles, as you're engaging them, immediately take that up. It gets first dib on that glucose. But what happens is chronically elevated glucose will bind to proteins and lipids through a process called glycation, which then will lead to a formation called advanced glycation, and it makes the advanced glycation end products, or
AGEs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And we've talked about those
wreaks
plenty of
havoc.
times, but keep that in mind. AGEs are an important thing to understand. That is sort of that glucose molecule binding to different proteins, binding to lipids, like she said, and think of that as sort of the destructive molecule, almost like little ticking time bombs that float around in your bloodstream. If you're going to remember a physiologic word today, remember that: advanced glycation end products, AGEs.
Yeah, because they stiffen the blood vessels. They will impair certain enzymes from being able to function well, and they will even trigger oxidative stress. As we know, oxidative stress is no good for the body. Think of that as your rusted pipes that can wreak havoc over time, and it's a very damaging process. So, and then that excess glucose will overwhelm the mitochondria, as we talked about. Mitochondria is your powerhouse of your cells. You want them to be able to function well. And if they're overwhelmed by glucose or in an inflamed state, they cannot do the exchanges that they need to do and produce the energy that we need for our day-to-day life. And this will increase the reactive oxidative or oxygen species and activates inflammatory pathways and basically erode all of these little microvascular and neurological integrity over time. Therefore, aging is, worsens.
Yeah. And, this aside, heavy lifting actually increases insulin sensitivity even without weight loss. So I think that's a critical point, because a lot of times when we're talking about this, we're thinking, weight loss, we got to keep blood sugar down. We're talking about GLP-1s and stuff. But even without weight loss, insulin sensitivity is important. It's critical. The scale might not move, but your metabolism's improving. Think about things like your fasting insulin level dropping. Again, less insulin to get the job done. We've said, even though we don't really think of it this way, insulin kind of is the bad guy. When fasting insulin drops, A1C improves. Your visceral fat, that fat around your organs, will decline. And then, of course, when fat declines and all of these metabolic processes improve, inflammation decreases. So this is all very important. Mechanically, I do like to talk physiology once in a while. Resistance training increases the GLUT4 translocation to the muscle cell membrane. And again, it's independent of insulin. So now at this point, it means you have more of this GLUT4 in the muscle membrane, and it can just, whenever it wants, pluck glucose out of the bloodstream. This will then expand your mitochondrial density. It makes more mitochondria in the body, and they're more robust and able to do more when they are working. And we've talked about this before. It'll activate AMPK signaling. All of this enhances glucose disposal and reduces the chronic high insulin state, which drives metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah, and this is super, super important for my peri and postmenopause patients, specifically peri. When you're starting to have this decline, that is your absolute best window to make sure that you're doing what you can to preserve these things happening. Just because you're postmenopause does not mean you're too late. You're not too late at any age to start improving this. This can help with, patients who have a fasting insulin over 10, PCOS, prediabetes. Think of these insulin resistant issues. I just want to touch on that sentence that Tim said again, that heavy lifting increases insulin sensitivity, including increasing your muscle mass, even without weight loss, but your metabolism will improve. And these are the conversations that I have with my patients a lot. If you go back to our last episode where we talk about our body composition scale, where you can talk about that increase in muscle gain, where you can be more metabolically flexible or stable. And this is huge for some of my patients that might have a stalling of the month. And I want to use quotation air quotes for saying stalling, a weight loss stalled month, because when you look at that body comp data, maybe they didn't lose pounds, so to speak, but when you look at their comp data, you can see that they've gained muscle and shed visceral fat. And so I will have an encouraging conversation with my patients where, listen, you didn't necessarily drop numbers on the scale, but this is what we call a non-scale victory, because you're actually more metabolically stable than you were last month because of that increase in muscle mass. So for all of my patients who are a little bit obsessive over the scale, get a body composition scale, track this, because even if you're not losing numbers, if your body comp data is changing where your muscle mass is increasing, you are becoming more metabolically stable. And that is the biggest important factor.
Yeah. And we mentioned, she had said patients with fasting insulin over 10, right, which is a marker of insulin resistance or prediabetes, you might associate that with a fasting glucose approaching 100 or higher, or a hemoglobin A1C of 5.7 or higher. Just sort of keep these numbers in mind, keep these tests in mind. We've talked about the importance of getting a fasting insulin. Remember that normal is not optimal. You don't have to click a certain number. You don't have to be fasting insulin of 12, hemoglobin A1C of 5.7. When you're trending in that direction, things are happening metabolically. And when you're trying to say, okay, how do I improve this? I know the doctor says eat right and exercise, but now you can take that a step further.
Yeah. What does that mean?
We talk all the time about what you need to eat. Now we're talking about where the exercise comes in. So pay attention. And looking at the flip side of this, not having muscle, the loss of muscle, which is called sarcopenia, and that's a pretty important word for you to remember as well. This is associated with all the bad things, right?
Yep.
Type 2 diabetes,
Frailty,
super frail, lots of falls, hospitalizations, and this will all lead to early mortality.
And we'll talk about how that early mortality can happen as our podcast goes on. But that is the basic of that. And then now I want to talk about how muscle will predict your survival. And it just sounds crazy to say that out loud. Like my muscle mass can predict my survival. Yes, there is actually large population studies out there that will consistently show that lower muscle mass is associated with higher all-case mortality. And this is because as we age, what takes people down usually is not just one isolated diagnosis. It's basically a loss of that reserve capacity. So let's talk about what that reserve capacity might be in real life.
Yeah. So reserve capacity is basically how much muscle, how much metabolic storage you have, how much flexibility you have in your body's ecosystem to withstand things like a severe infection. Real life example, my dad, a couple years ago, got a small little cut on his arm working in a basement. Within 24 hours, his arm had blown up. His mental status was gone. He was like wandering around the neighborhood.
Super quick.
Yeah, he was in the hospital, septic shock. He would have never predicted that. It was a cut. It wasn't like he went swimming in a river in Africa and got some crazy infection, right? Like it was just a normal thing. So when we're talking about real life examples, an unexpected infection, a surgery, all of a sudden one day your stomach hurts and you realize you go to the hospital and, oh my God, you need your gallbladder out. And now that takes you to a hospitalization for any reason, like an infection, a surgery. And then even just physiologic stress in general, like a lot of stress on your body, a higher mechanical load. Maybe you need to go back to work when you hadn't been working, things like that.
It's basically how much your body can tolerate these stressors and all these stressors, life, essentially just life. And like Tim said, muscle is that metabolic reserve. It's that fuel tank. And when someone has more lean mass, they are better to recover if they have a hospital stay or not even have a hospital stay at all. They can tolerate inflammation better. They can handle, chemotherapy better and infections more effectively. It might not even need a doctor for some of these, for like Tim said, for his dad, a normal person would have had a cut and carried on their day. And if somebody can't have or handle that stress load, then this is what can spiral out of control. So,
and I'll tell you, as a practicing emergency medicine physician, I can a lot of times in the emergency department know when somebody's not going to do well with this. They come in, and we'll get to this later in the podcast, but a 70-year-old lady that breaks her hip and she's all skin and bones. I know in my mind, this is not going to be a good journey for you. Someone who's septic from a bad infection, and I see you're a little bag of bones, man or woman. This is not going to go well. Yep. And I'm telling you, this is real and it's something to pay attention to.
We see it very often. And think of that, like something can happen to absolutely any of us. So during this acute stress, like Tim said, illness, surgery, injury, trauma, your body will actually become insulin resistant. This is a protective mechanism. Your cortisol will rise, your glucose rises. And if somebody has that inadequate muscle mass to protect them, that glucose, if they had that good muscle mass, that glucose would have somewhere to go. But what if they don't? What if, like Tim said, there's this bag of bones and they don't have any of that metabolic or muscle reserve? What happens? Well, their hyperglycemia or elevated glucose will become worse. That can feed infection. That can become worse. Healing slows. This is why diabetics have incredibly slow wound healing. This is why smokers have incredibly slow wound healing. High sugar, vasoconstriction of vessels, you will have a longer recovery. And this is also why ICU patients that are sarcopenic will have significantly worse survival rates, just like Tim said. You're admitting someone to the ICU and they have no muscle on them, that's likely going to be their last ride. They're probably not going to make it out of the ICU. And muscle is just, it's about everyday metabolism for you, but it's also about having that stress buffering capacity. And from this angle, muscle isn't just looking good and as a cosmetic, it's literally protective. And just to throw in a quick story, because we underestimate how often that this could happen in our lives. I have a horse that I've had for a very long time. She was my barrel horse, and she's becoming very arthritic. And I've noticed over the past few years, she's been getting sarcopenic in her front shoulders, and she almost has no muscle mass anymore because she's not running around in the pastures like she used to. And now it's to the point where when she gets down, she literally cannot get up very well. And this is going to be a decision where she's going to have no quality of life, or we're going to have to put her down sooner, not because of her arthritis, because she's sarcopenic and cannot get up off the ground by herself. And this is just real life example to say, like, it might not be the disease that takes you out. It might be your muscle mass. And that it's just so real that we don't even think about these in our day-to-day life. I just had the vet out the other week, and she confirmed everything. She looked at me right away and she said, look how sarcopenic she is. And I'm like, I know. She's skin and bones up front. That's where her arthritis is. She doesn't like to walk around on it. And unfortunately, it's going to end her, not her arthritis.
Yeah. So the other important aspect, so muscle obviously has to have something to attach to. So let's talk about bone for a moment. Bone density and osteoporosis prevention are the other really big part to this picture. And muscle and your activation of muscle plays a critical role in that. So when you lift heavy, your muscle pulls on bone. That mechanical tension is what stimulates osteoblast activity, and osteoblasts are what build cells. Are the cells that build bone. Sorry.
Yep, there it is. There it is.
So this principle is called Wolff's Law. Bone adapts to the stress placed upon it. That's not really a big deal, but just understanding the concept. If you don't load it, you lose it. Heavy loading will increase that bone mineral density. It will preserve things like hip strength, long bone strength, leading to more muscle strength, and this will reduce fracture risk.
Yeah. And I love that saying, if you don't load it, you lose it. And for life, I mean, when you're younger, it's kind of those things, you don't use it, you lose it. But seriously, when it comes to muscle mass, as you age, if you do not load that muscle, you will lose muscle. And I cannot stress this enough. For my patients or my people that are retiring and just living life, like, please, for the love of the Lord, find some way to lift weights, because that will prolong your life. And so you can actually enjoy retirement and be healthier and longer lived. This is that quality of life we're talking about. But this isn't just, being active. I'm talking like, start strength training. It makes the world of difference. And
we talk to people every day for metabolic health, and a lot of people, their form of exercise and maybe getting outside is walking. And I always say, great. I don't have any problem with walking, and we'll talk about this more in the podcast. I don't have any problem with walking, but we have to find a way to activate your muscles more. Chest vest, wrist weights, ankle weights, getting some dumbbells, resistance bands in there. And we have to encourage our audience to find a way to do that. The younger you are, it's never too early and it's never too late. I mean, it actually can be too late at some time, but just because if you're 65 and listening to this, don't think I'm too old, I can't start strength training. No, you can start strength training. You have to do it within your capabilities, but you can start. Yeah. While we're on this subject and kind of talking about as you get a little older, you got to think about hip fractures. Hip fractures are not benign events. In women over 65, hip fractures carry up to a 20 to 30% one-year mortality rate. That's a one-year death rate in some people. A fracture isn't just a fracture. It's the beginning of a rapid decline. Mm-hmm. Think of it, as Mia said, loss of independence. If you have that sarcopenia, now you have a fractured bone, your pain's worse, you're healing slower. You can't get up and walk to the kitchen and cook a meal. You can't get in and out of the shower by yourself. You can't wipe your butt after you use the restroom. You lose your independence. Now, all of a sudden, you don't want to go out anywhere because you can't do it without help. You lose your socialization. You lose your social circle. You start to lose your mental health. This leads to isolation, and this leads to rapid deterioration.
Deterioration. I say this all when I was working in the ER, when we would have these old people that would break hips, we just knew it, like, this was it. And if they had that chance of survival past that 1 year, they usually will have a rapid decline in their health within the next few years. And essentially, that hip fracture was the starting point. And I just want to bring this up real quick, because women are at statistically higher to break your hip, especially when you get into those older ages. Why? Because you lost your estrogen, and men actually still have estrogen. And by the time that a woman hits menopause and is not replacing their hormones, your significant other or the men in your life have more estrogen than you do. do, which is just wild to wrap your head around. So for my patients that are a strong, believer in the biohacking and tapping into that world of replacing your hormones, if you're a candidate and maybe you have known nothing about that, but I highly suggest that you visit that, because even for, estrogen or estradiol patches and things like that, that it can be a first line treatment for prevention of osteopenia and osteoporosis, because estrogen is so very receptive and needed for that bone strength and growth. So for all of my patients who think, maybe you say, my mom and my grandma, they all died from hip fractures, then definitely consider, starting a hormone replacement therapy if that's right for you, for that prevention as well. Plus, not to mention all the massive benefits that bioidentical hormone replacement has, but that's another topic for itself. Anyway,
Agreed.
Okay, so but back to bone. Bone is living. It's a very dynamic tissue, and we tend to think of bone as like static, like it's a stick.
Like
it's really
just a
not.
stick
It's not just
sitting
a stick. Bone is metabolically active tissue, like I said, very responsive to estrogen, and it is constantly remodeling through two different types of cells. The first one, osteoclast, which is basically the breakdown of bone, of old bone, and then osteoblast, which is the building up of new bone. And our body is incredibly smart. It keeps always, balancing, breakdown, and rebuilding. So the problem of this can lead to that when you age, especially when, like I said, when estrogen declines in our females, bone breakdown begins to basically outpace the bone formation. So you're breaking down faster than your body is able to build back up.
Unless
you give the body a reason to build. And that reason is that mechanical tension, and I will absolutely say hormones
stress,
too, but
loading,
stress on.
Loading.
Yep. It activates those osteocytes and stimulates those osteoblasts activity through that transduction pathway and increases local growth factor, or IGF-1 signaling. So this shifts bone metabolism away from the reabsorption of the osteoclast and towards the bone formation, or the osteoblast. A lot of words there. Very important.
Yeah, important
sentence
concept.
there.
Give your body a reason to keep your bone strong and create new bone. Put tension on it. Load. So that's basically the summary of all those important words.
Yep.
And an important note here, low weight, high rep workouts are not enough to significantly improve bone density.
Mm-hmm.
The research shows you need a couple different things here. Heavy compound lifts. Okay, so this is your squats, your deadlifts, your lunges, overhead presses, and even rows. They load the spine and the hips, multiple muscle groups, and the areas that are most vulnerable to osteopenia and osteoporosis, which are the spine and the hips. That's number one. So you need heavy compound lifts. Number two, progressive overload. So that's gradually increasing weight, resistance, or intensity over time so that bone tissue senses increasing mechanical stress and adapts by becoming stronger and more dense. This is why we tell patients, you have to challenge yourself. You can't go to the gym or have resistance bands or dumbbells at home and lift the 5-pound dumbbell curls doing 3 sets of 10 for 21 years.
Right.
Like you can't do it. You have to progress your body.
And I get you have to start somewhere, but your goal right now should be your lightest or your heaviest weight right now should soon become your lightest. And obviously work your way to that. But I tell my patients all the time, they're like, I'm working out. What are you doing? Oh, just my 2-pounders. I'm like, you're a gallon of milk. Like what? That's more than what I just don't even understand that. I'm like, you have to lift more than that. You have to. You're not going to do anything for your body.
You can start there, but you have to progress.
You have to start, but you have to progress. Your body has to build down or break down and then build up and break down and build up. And if you continue to lift these easy peasy weights that are essentially not, hard for you at all, your body's not going to break down, and it's going to have that basically that homeostasis, like we're good. This is just daily activities of life. I'm not built like my muscles are good. You go back to the olden days where they had to stress and adapt. That is how your body grows and changes. So
remember that word, we've mentioned it before, hormesis, challenging your body, putting it under stress so that it'll grow. So we mentioned you need heavy compound lifts, progressive overload, and 2 to 4 sessions per week. You can't just do this once a week. You have to have the consistent loading required to repeatedly stimulate these osteoblasts, and this will maintain that anabolic or muscle growth, bone growth signaling. And even impact training when appropriate is another one. So jumps, step downs, stair climbing, even light plyometrics can all create this brief ground reaction force. So, basically your body hitting the ground forcefully is boom. It's also like that tension or that stress. And this will stimulate bone remodeling as well.
Yep. Lifting is fracture prevention, and fracture prevention is life extension. I like that.
Okay.
All right. So next,
let's move on to another important thing. So we talked about muscle, how it relates to bone, and let's talk about the brain now, because this is important too. And you don't think about that, right? You don't really think about your brain when we're talking about lifting weights and lifting heavy.
Right. So specifically, we'll talk about the brain health and actually a dementia risk, which, as we know, is very common in today's day and age. And when most people think about dementia, they think about, when they think about prevention, they think about, do your crossword puzzles.
Get your Sudoku and you won't get dementia.
Take all your fish oil, or maybe it's just genetics, or make sure that your brain is working.
And that's great. Do those things.
Absolutely.
Do your crossword, do your Sudoku,
Challenge your
fish
brain.
oil's
Because
great.
remember, there's multiple different parts of your brain, and the ones that have to think and be more of a creative side, that's a different neurocircuitry, and you want to make sure that you're utilizing that absolutely. But also, there's more. A lot of people don't think of, deadlifts, and they should, because your brain, once again, nothing operates in isolation, although many providers seem to think so. And as, you age or your brain ages, it responds to that systemic metabolism, systemic inflammation, vascular health, hormonal signaling, which all are directly impacted by muscle.
Agreed.
So let's break this down.
Yeah, so I always like the physiology part. So I'm sorry if I lose some of you here. You can always just skip over me rambling, but I do like to talk about this. So resistance training increases, and there's lots of different things. When I talk about this, I'm not trying to be a textbook. I'm just always trying to give you guys some physiologic understanding. Resistance training increases BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. We talked about it before. It's in a couple other episodes, but just think of the BDNF as like Miracle Grow for your brain, okay? It stimulates new neurons. It strengthens synapses, which are connections between neurons. It enhances neuroplasticity, meaning the flexibility of the neurons, the ability to grow and adapt. And it protects against the neurodegeneration or the breakdown of these neurons and the synaptic connections that they make. So we will see this in conditions like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and vascular dementia, all have to do with not only the neuron or the synapse, but the plasticity as well. So BDNF helps with all of that.
Mm-hmm. In resistance training, especially that moderate to higher intensity, it significantly increases circulating BDNF, and more BDNF means better memory, better learning, better stress resilience, and of course, improved executive functioning.
What's that thing that is it Wordle? Everybody likes that game, Wordle, where you I played it a couple times, but yeah. So you want to be the Wordle champion.
Oh, on your phone?
It's like a crossword thing. I bet you a bunch of people listening are like, I love Wordle.
It's probably not even called that, and they're laughing at us.
Yeah, whatever. But I've played it. It's fun. Anyway, if you want to be the champion, if you want to set Sudoku records, you need some BDNF, do some damn squats.
Yep, absolutely. But there's also another layer here.
Another layer?
Another one. Chronic insulin resistance is also strongly linked to Alzheimer's.
And did we say that lifting weight and building muscle helps with insulin resistance?
Yep.
Oh, just 400 times.
Right. Some people refer to this as like type 3 diabetes, which actually I completely agree with. When your brain becomes insulin resistant, yes, that can actually happen. Glucose metabolism in neurons will decline. And obviously you need those neurons to fire appropriately. They do some weird firing, then you can act a little demented.
Yeah.
Heavy lifting improves that systemic insulin sensitivity, and that of course includes the brain. So we're not just building muscle as we lift, we are protecting your cognition. Remember, not a single organ in your body fully functions in isolation. Never.
It just doesn't happen. So we talked muscle, we talked bone, we talked brain. Let's talk another important thing. This comes up on our podcast over and over again. Let's talk hormones.
Hormones. If you are one of my female patients in that peri and postmenopause state, you'll know what I'm talking about.
What's the joke? Like the difference between something and a hormone?
I have no idea.
It's dirty. It's a filthy joke.
Goodness.
I'm going to look it up for the next one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll start our next podcast with that one. But anyway, heavy resistance training doesn't just increase, a single hormone. It improves your entire hormonal environment, especially how responsive your tissue can be to those hormones. And in human physiology, receptor sensitivity often matters more than just an absolute hormone level. So once again, when you lift heavy, your muscle fibers will experience significant mechanical retention and that metabolic stress that we were talking about. You have to stress to adapt. And then you have your lactic acid is why you're sore sometimes. Your lactate accumulates and your energy demand will rise. And the brain interprets this as a signal that the body needs to adapt and become more resilient. Remember, this is how we grow. If you're not going to change, then don't expect yourself to change. You have to challenge your body. And then the hypothalamus activates the pituitary triggering those pulses of that growth hormone.
Yep. And again, not to get too crazy in the physiology, but growth hormone is a pulsatile release throughout the day. That biggest pulse will happen at night. But that's why you can also try to time certain eating, time if you're taking supplements or peptides, time exercises to catch those growth hormone pulses. So I'll just throw that in there. Growth hormone is very important. It drives so many downstream effects. Can't get into all of them here, but for this particular podcast, we mentioned that increased IGF-1, so that local growth hormone, that local muscle growth stimulator. Muscle repair and regeneration is a result of some of this growth hormone in the factors. Improved fat metabolism and even more bone formation, again, due to different signaling pathways. And at the same time, resistance training improves whole body hormonal signaling. Think of things like modestly increasing testosterone. Yes, even in our women.
Listen to our testosterone podcast.
Yep. What is more abundant in women? Estrogen or testosterone?
Testosterone on the molecular level.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the overall volume. So anyway, resistance training improves whole body hormonal signaling. We mentioned testosterone, improves estrogen receptor activity, which is important, as Mia said, for that bone formation and that new bone growth. Reducing visceral fat, which lowers inflammatory hormone disruption. We do not want a lot of fat. We definitely don't want a lot of visceral fat.
Visceral fat is the fat around your organs. That is your very dangerous, deadly fat. It can impair blood flow. It can create a crap ton of cytokines, which are very inflammatory. That is,
remember it's alive.
Bad,
That's what I try
form.
to tell people. A fat is alive. It has a mind of its own. It's almost like its own little ecosystem.
Yep. Subcutaneous fat, and in moderation, is very protective, and sometimes our body can use and benefit for some. That visceral fat, no good for the organs.
So we still haven't got around. We have it on the list, but we still want to do a podcast episode on cortisol and the HPA axis. It's very deep. There's so many different interconnections, but for the purpose of this conversation, also remember that properly programmed strength training can recalibrate your entire stress response. It affects the entire HPA axis. You cannot have a hormone conversation without talking about the HPA axis. So this chronic stress, sarcopenia, not having good metabolic health will dysregulate this HPA axis. Cortisol will stay elevated. Over time, heavy resistance training can improve stress resilience and actually help align this axis on its own. The resting cortisol will fall. Your sleep quality will improve. We just did an entire episode on all the benefits of higher sleep quality.
Yep.
And then your recovery capacity increases.
Absolutely. And once again, I say this all the time. If you're peri and post menopause, it is non-negotiable. It's not just an optional fitness regimen. You have to lift weights in order to live longer, prolong disease processes, support your bones, support your brain. It is an entire system. So I will preach this until I'm blue in the face. You guys really underestimate the power of muscle.
Physiologically, you mentioned the peri and postmenopausal women.
Yeah.
Physiologically, as estrogen declines, which women, please understand, as you're leading up to menopause, right? Menopause is defined by a single day, right? It's 12 months after you had your last menstrual cycle, right? But it's actually, it's a whole period leading up to it. It's a decade.
It could be up to 10 years prior.
Your estrogen's on a roller coaster. Some months it's high, some months it's low, but overall it's declining. As estrogen declines, these fast twitch muscle fibers can become lost. Bone reabsorption accelerates and outpaces bone formation, as Mia said. Insulin resistance rises and metabolic rate falls. This is why we see changes in your lipids. This is why you gain weight.
20 to 35 average pounds put on in this peri and post state. It is, even though you didn't change a single thing about your life,
correct.
You can respond to stress differently because you're more insulin resistant, because you're pumping that out more. Your metabolism can change because estrogen plays such a crucial role with that. Your progesterone probably already fell off if you're closer to that end stage of postmenopause. So you're not sleeping well. Your GABA receptors aren't getting stimulated. There is so
your thyroid
much
function
to
changes,
this.
your SHBG, your thyroid binding globulin,
The
it all
shift in
changes.
lipids, like Tim said,
So heavy
Massive.
lifting counteracts these changes by providing the mechanical and metabolic signals that the body once received from more youthful hormone levels, right? It's essentially telling muscle, bone, and metabolism to maintain homeostasis. We're good here. We're going to keep doing this.
Yeah. I mean, it's all the time. You don't train to look good. I mean, that's a perk, sure, but I train for future prevention, and that's what the biggest take home.
I mean,
point
I don't
for
mind
all
if
of
you train to look good, though.
Well, yeah, I'm saying we could
do a little bit of
for
that.
sure. But I basically train for my future, as everybody should, because you feel great while you're doing that in real time, and then obviously as you get older, things become so much easier.
Yeah.
I have friends that are my age that they're all like, "Oh, I'm so old, I can barely get up," and I'm like, I am I'm definitely not there, it's all about your lifestyle,
Yeah.
which, as you can see. Anyway,
Okay.
next, mental health.
Yeah, very important topic, mental health. Let's talk
Yep.
about that for a
How in the
minute.
world can muscle mass help your mental health?
Well, it just boosts your mood, right?
So much more. Strength training doesn't just boost your mood, it changes your brain chemistry and inflammation signaling. It literally changes your brain chemistry. And research is very clear on this one as well. It shows that resistance training can reduce depression symptoms, improve anxiety, and improve sleep quality. Tell me that you're going to work out for a few months and tell me that your mood and everything did not feel so much better. It is a stress response, and you feel it, and you feel so much better after a workout. You release those feel-good hormones. You just feel so much better.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we're talking, let's dump physiologically into it real quick.
Sure.
Multiple pathways. We mentioned increasing BDNF, that brain-derived neurotrophic growth factor, and depression is associated with low BDNF, causing your hippocampus to shrink, affects lots of different pathways in your brain. So right there, that's number one. Dopamine and norepinephrine signaling. So this improves your motivation and reward pathways. We've talked a lot in previous podcasts about dopamine sort of being that motivation and reward, norepinephrine firing all those catecholamines. You need that for your body to do its job in the sympathetic nervous system. Working out will lower chronic inflammatory cytokines, which are strongly linked to depression as well. And then, of course, as Mia mentioned, increasing GABA tone, right? So this calming neurotransmitter, GABA is supported by the calming neurotransmitter of progesterone, and it's sort of like that relaxation tone in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So this connection's just really important, especially in our hormonally sensitive women.
Absolutely. And for all my females listening to me who are my patient who I have on progesterone, you know how much better you feel. So it really does make a difference in hormonal support.
I think our listening audience is like 70% female from what we last estimated. But for the 30% of males that are listening, all of this is important. I mean, even when we mention estradiol in females, just translate it to you as well. Yeah. I mean, your hormones, your testosterone, your gonadal axis. Yes, there's differences, and certainly we can get into them, but the same things apply. Yeah. There's so much benefit
but
for you.
But also, I'm a huge advocate too for my females. Like when I give my females hormonal education, I'm like, share this with your husband so they know what you're going through, because a lot of times I feel like men just feel like women are just, midlife crisis or off the deep end, when really it's just a hormonal catastrophe that we're trying to balance. And muscle preservation and muscle mass growth is one of those key factors to supporting that. So if you are a man listening and you have females in your life, they can also benefit, from all of this. So
yeah, these things will really, they don't just help you feel stronger physically, but they help you become more emotionally resilient, which is one of the biggest factors in your mental health.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say real quick, I want to touch on the dopamine. This is like basically your motivation and drive, but it's really cool that one of the most debilitating aspects of depression is essentially loss of motivation. You've heard this many times. I just can't get out of bed, whatever the case may be. And that's basically a dopamine circuitry. And heavy resistance training increases the catecholamine activity, like Tim mentioned, and including that dopamine and norepinephrine. So some of those feel-good hormones, which will obviously improve your drive, your focus, and that reward pathway, which then, of course, you're going to get better at life and tasks and energy and all the things. The more energy that you let your body give off, meaning the more energy that you output, the more it's going to give you back in life.
Yeah.
More energy it gives you.
So kind of to sum that up, think of it like this, right? Lifting creates immediate, measurable reward feedback in your body. You lifted more. You finished the set, you finished the workout, you tolerated discomfort. That's going to reinforce that dopaminergic reward loop. That's going to give you that feel good, and it's going to make you want to do it again. In this world that we live in of like passive scrolling, low effort stimulation, heavy lifting provides earned reward, and that makes a difference neurologically for all the reasons we've discussed thus far.
Yeah, there's benefits both ways. Like short term, you're going to feel great while you're doing it. Like I said, I feel amazing when I strength train 5 days a week. But then in long term, you're going to have so much more longevity to everything that we're talking about. So I say this, time and time again, if you're just starting to work out and you're not seeing results, that's okay. You're going to feel a little bit better as you're doing it, but think about that long term, but you're still getting benefits every single workout that you do.
Agreed. So as we're getting close to the end here, we mentioned lifting heavy helps you live longer. We've spent a lot of time here talking about the quality of life. Let's talk about longevity real quick as we head towards a recap and closing it out for the day.
Yep. Multiple large observational studies show that adults who perform 2 or more resistance training sessions per week have significantly lower all-case mortalities compared to those who do none.
You keep saying all-case. It's all-cause mortality.
All-cause, sorry. It's 2.
Driving me nuts.
Not even 2. 2, like who can't do 2 workout sessions a week? That's just crazy. It's not even that much. And here we are doing, 5+ and we feel very good. But
This is like this is what a husband and wife podcast is. Like, we're sitting here sharing nuggets about life, and all I can focus on is you're saying the word case instead of cause.
and all I can think about is just ignoring you. That's exactly what just happened. Did you talk to me? Okay.
All right. So a key nuance to understand here, cardio and strength do different things. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, this is why I never want to poop on cardio. Like, do cardio, but I do tell people, if you have to choose between 15 minutes of cardio or 15 minutes of lifting, choose lifting, every time. But some things to understand: aerobic exercise, that cardiovascular exercise, it can protect your heart. It can protect your mitochondria. We've talked about it can protect your VO2 max, which is your maximum amount of oxygen consumption, basically your ability to burn fuel and efficiently. And strength training protects muscle mass, bone density, glucose, insulin sensitivity, and all of this, then your fall risk, your traumas, things like that.
Yeah, they're both incredibly important. So when you take a little bit of that cardio and then the strength training combined, you have the lowest mortality risk. And why? Because aging doesn't kill just, through one pathway. It happens through multiple pathways. Cardiovascular disease, your frailty, your metabolic dysfunction, your falls, the insulin resistant, everything that we talked about in the beginning of this podcast. Cardio protects the engine, strength protects the frame, and you essentially need both,
Agreed. So again, why heavy specifically? We kind of talked about this a little bit before, but just recapping, it is important. A little physiology. Not all resistance training produces the same adaptation, right? So light weights will improve muscular endurance, and that's beneficial, right? But it doesn't sufficiently recruit those type 2 fibers, and that's probably an important point to mention. We talked about type 2 fibers and fast twitch fibers, and this is what we were saying in women: as estrogen declines, you lose those type 2 fibers. And the same thing can happen in men as you age, as you lose testosterone levels, as you lose muscle mass. And these are what generate power, okay? This is what prevents a fall. And as you would expect, since they are so great, they're the first fibers that we lose when we age. So their decline is what creates frailty. It's part of that whole sarcopenia picture.
Yeah. These type 2 fibers are very, very important. Like Tim said, they are going to have your prevention. So heavy loads recruit and preserve those types of fibers, like heavy weightlifting. Like we said, it maintains that power. It preserves those fast twitch muscles and improves your balance and reaction time as well. Imagine how many less elderly people would fall if they just had better balance too. I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. You trip over nothing off of air.
Yep.
That balance, that strength training, getting, that it's just crazy to think about. Like, because when I see my patients and I deal with them every single day, when they say that they're strength training, like I said in the last podcast when we were talking about, like, strength train as if you fell and trying to get off the toilet, swing that kettlebell as if you're picking up a grandchild. Real life scenarios to strength train, because you might be alone one day and need help, and your muscle mass might be the only way out of that. And people just really take that for granted.
When you catch yourself from falling, you actually are preserving your independence, and independence is longevity. And we mentioned why. You lose your socialization, you lose your drive, you lose your motivation, and then things just go downhill. Yeah.
I mean, look at the blue zone areas where they live life and garden and have a massive social
community
group, and they're so active in, like Tim said, community. And so it's that mental, emotional, and physical connection that keeps everybody thriving. So
I saw you looking for that word. I came in with connection.
Good.
Husband on the spot.
Way to read my brain.
Ignore
Probably
me
wasn't
now,
the word I was thinking, but it fit.
wifey.
All right, let's dive into let's wrap it up. Someone's got some toot after not sleeping. And that shows too. Go back to our sleep podcast and see what it does to the brain.
2 night shifts in a row, minimal sleep.
Yeah, wrecks your life. But anyway, so when we asked in the beginning, do people who lift heavy live longer? We're asking a lot more than that. We're asking what protects us from things like insulin resistance and dementia and osteoporosis and depression and being frail and hormonal decline and help I fell and can't get up type thing.
And there's one answer. Well, there's a lot of answers, but the answer today is muscle.
I almost said there's lots of muscle. There's
the
lots
connection
of
today is muscle.
Yep.
Muscle regulates glucose.
And
it protects your bones.
Yep.
It stabilizes hormones. It supports brain plasticity. It lowers inflammation, and it preserves power and thus your independence.
Yep. It's not just about aesthetics. So hopefully that you can see that, strength training isn't just about looks. Like we said, it is a good plus, obviously. However, strength train to live longer, think about your future. What do you want to do in the next year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? That starts now. And your reserve is determining how well you will survive your illness and stress and surgery and anti-aging and life itself. If you're chronically getting sick multiple times a year, take a step back and say, okay, what can I do to help my muscle preservation? Now, granted, there are so many things that can be contributing to illness and things like that, but muscle preservation is a darn good start. So it matters. It matters a lot.
Knowledge is power and muscle is power. Yep. Thank you for listening today.
All right, guys, if you enjoyed the podcast, please like, share, follow, leave a comment. It helps us grow. If you didn't like it, don't leave a comment. Share it with your loved ones. We have a supplement line that launched, rixahealth.com, RIXA health.com.
You're looking for good, clean products to help you do the things we talk about every day. Check us out.
Because of creatine and all the other things. So let us know if there's anything else we can do for you, and we'll catch you next time.
This product is for education and conversation. This podcast is for education and conversation, not medical advice. See, I don't do well when I read. I have to just talk.
Well when you don't sleep.
It is not a replacement for personalized care, diagnosis, or treatment. Always talk with your own healthcare provider before making changes to your health, medications, or lifestyle. Our goal is to give you better questions, better understanding of disease, and more ownership of your health. Knowledge is power. We'll see you next week.
Get some sleep with heavy shit.
Love
See you
you
guys.